Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, a weekly podcast by Lace Partners, a fundamentally different HR and payroll consultancy. Each week, we tackle some of the most interesting topics facing senior HR professionals. So whether that's from employee value proposition, performance management, people strategy, or even payroll, we cover it all. So join us for the next 30 minutes. And if you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on with the show. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, joining you on our weekly dosage of all things HR on the Offensive. Today, we are delving into the world of skills and productivity. I'm going to introduce our special guest in a second. He is a returner, so he's very au fait with the world of HR on the Offensive, and I'm sure he'll be very au fait with the random, fundamentally different question that I'll get to in a minute. But before that, who's my co-host today? How you doing, James? You good?
Good, thanks. Yeah.
With the rain, are you apprehensive about the completely random question that I'm going to ask you? Not related to talent and skills, because we will get into that, but I need to throw you off scent first.
No, looking forward to it. Ready?
All right, good. That's what I like to hear. So a little bit of a framing exercise before I introduce our guests. We have recently produced a white paper. It's called The Efficiency Paradox, and it focuses on this challenge that we've come across when talking to chief human resources officers, CHROs and CPOs, really looking at the drive for productivity. There's a challenge amongst, I think UK, we focus on UK quite a lot, but I think this is a global challenge that many organizations are identifying. If you look at reports like Future on Jobs from the World Economic Forum, they point to things like this in their lengthy reports. But businesses are challenged to do more with less. And that's the premise of our Efficiency Paradox white paper. Often, if we need to save money, if we need to knock a little bit off the bottom line or a lot, headcount reduction can often be seen as that starting point. But what we say in the Efficiency Paradox is actually there are other ways, there are other things to think about. We break it down into three sections. There's look at your operating model and the impact that that has on your business and how you can make productivity or efficiency savings there. And efficiency savings is not just cash as well. There's also, it's around productivity. We look at skills too, which I think is where we'll probably deviate more towards, given our guest today, the impact of skills and developing an appropriate framework for driving usage of greater productivity in your business through skills. And we also look at the impact of digital optimization and technology. That's a little bit of a framing exercise. I'll bring our guest in now. It's Neil Carberry, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. Neil, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm good. Hi, Chris. Hi, Gemma. Good to be back.
The reason why I decided I wanted to get Neil on again is not just that he's a fabulous guest from the first time in which we did it, but the REC actually produced a report, or it was a bit of research that they did. It was earlier this year at the time of recording, and they released it in April, and it was looking at the fact that amid rising sickness rates in the UK, employers are grappling with significant hits to productivity. And it was that kind of thinking of how do employers deal with the challenges around things like sickness rates related to well-being. The REC came up with interesting comments on it, flexible working. It made me think about sickness rates being short-term hits to productivity versus what we talk about, which is the long-term challenges or things you can do in the efficiency paradox to drive productivity. Neil, you and I had actually, no, I've got to do my fundamentally different question first. I can't miss that. We're going to get into that, but I wanted to get Neil on to talk around the research that the REC had done. Neil and I had a chat a few weeks ago at the time of recording, and there were some really, really interesting things that he picked up around the way work is done and what's happening on a wider scale to businesses and the relationships amongst the C-suite, HR and risk taking. So we're going to get into that. But I nearly threw myself off with this long random monologue by not asking the fundamentally different question. We're going to let our guests go first, Gems. Neil, unfortunately, yourself, myself, and Gemma, I think we've all just been joking about it in the virtual green room. Our names are becoming a bit old-fashioned. And there was an article which I've just read in a local national newspaper, which was that fewer than 10 dad names, they called it, so Steves and Craigs and Gordons and Collins, they're all disappearing. There was only 10 people that were named that last year. So if you could have your time again and decide to rename yourself to anything, what would it be, Neil?
Well, I mean, I think Neil is very much a dad name. I think all these things are cultural. They go and come back. I meet young people today coming into our industry and they're called things like Esme, which of course would be very much a granny name when I was a kid. Neil is a classic one because you're a lot of Neils born after Neil Armstrong and the moon. He's someone who bears the cross of having been in school when The Young Ones was on television. In that spirit of things coming back. I'm a historian by academic background. I've long held the view that for women, the name Elf-Gifu needs to come back because if you go into 11th century English, like every other woman's called Elf-Gifu. So if I'm saying that, I should apply that to myself as well. A couple of options. I like Harthacnut. Good name. Oh. My favourite is there's a king of Scotland in the 10th century, so kind of my homeland, called Amleth. And I think Amleth is a great name.
That's the kind of intelligence that we love on the HR on the Offensive podcast. James, I'm going to let you go, but I'm just going to lower the tone so that you can go somewhere in the middle because mine was either Aladdin or Sebastian. So, yeah, that's me. Well, James, what are you going for?
And I was going to go for Artemis Ryall. Don't you think that kind of flows? I like it. Mythology. I loved it. And also I wanted to call my kids it, but my husband refused.
That was two really cool names and I feel completely and utterly sideswiped. I thought you were both going to come up with something terrible like me, but no, fabulous names. Right, let's get into the nub of this conversation. Neil, you and I had a conversation, as I said, in the preamble. Can I get some initial impressions? One of the things I think was fascinating that you said that there are missing dynamics of the labour market.
Let's start big and work small. Things feel really tough at the moment in business because lots of stuff is flying around. And the question for CEOs and FDs, much more CPOs and HRDs, is what's our attitude to risk? Most of our business leadership grew into leadership roles in the period between 2007 and 2022, which has some fundamental differences to the time both before and since. The most obvious one is that money is not free in the way that it was in that period. And we talk a lot about that from a corporate leadership perspective in terms of what am I going to invest in? What am I going to not invest in? But actually think about it from an HR perspective. Why was it sustainable to restrain pay growth quite as much as we did in the period between 2008 and 2020? Well, the answer to that is yes, inflation was low, but also every family in the country had an interest-free credit card. So the workforce had a much more copable financial planning environment, and that enabled companies to manage things in a different way. You also then had a real sense that people prioritized maintaining employment over increasing reward or moving on. That's become a challenge for us. The Resolution Foundation's done some great work on the generation that entered the labour market around 2008, 2009, 2010. Their problem is not, while we talk about young people being flighty, they're not. They don't change jobs enough. In your 20s, you should change jobs because that's how you build responsibility, build experience, build reward. So there's a bit of treacle that's developed over the last 15, 20 years in the employee side, and a kind of a very different operating framework on the company side. That then runs ram into the post-pandemic world. You have very high inflation, initially driven by the need to create money, frankly, to navigate the pandemic, and then driven by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You've got multiple global centres of economic power, the rise of the Middle East as a genuine economic powerhouse, the continuing development of China as a key party in Southeast Asia. Most of the real potential in the global labour force is in sub-Saharan Africa. We're starting to see businesses putting some really quite high demand work out to supply partners in places like South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, as those labour forces integrate more. So the world becomes more complex more challenging to compete in for companies, and the tools that companies have had probably aren't there as much anymore. I'm an employment relations guy, and I think what we're learning is that employers have to start behaving like employers again. It's not about getting the company song right or getting the treats right or getting the policy right. It's about understanding what your people need and what you need to achieve as a business and finding the most efficient way of bringing those two things together. And that is much more heavily based on the things people really value at work, which when you actually go and ask them, it's about control, it's about relationships, it's about respect. And yes, of course, it's about pay. So there's something here about how we organise work needing to change in an environment where both employees and companies are feeling they're under more pressure. There's my starter for 10, Chris.
Oh, I love that. Gems, any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely think the environment's much more complex in terms of the dynamics socially, what people are looking for, and the impact of post-pandemic prioritization of individuals and prioritization of from business perspective. So we talk about productivity and that is being prioritized more from an organizational point of view. Individually, I think there's a different balance and different prioritization for people in their mindset now. How do you manage all of that as well as the broader environment? So I'm with Neil. I think it's a shifting environment and we have to change the way that we do things.
That point is really important because what people kind of the headlines of kind of what people want at work are relatively consistent across communities, but what that means practically about what individuals want from their working life varies widely. So I obviously, you know this, Chris, as an ex-RECer, I spend most of my life defending forms of work that aren't permanent full-time employment contracts because people want them, because it helps them manage their way through their working life. And I think that piece is quite a challenge. When you look at some of what government's doing, for instance, with things like the Employment Rights Bill, that reflects quite a sort of one-size-fits-all view of the world. That's not to say we shouldn't think about the power dynamic of employment in the UK and maybe adjusting it to make sure it's efficient for the next couple of decades. But that piece around, do we really understand what workers are thinking and want from work? I think at the governmental level, the answer to that is no, not really. They haven't run the surveys that they need to run for quite some time on it. But actually, in workplaces, we probably could understand it better than we do. The challenge with that is the balance of leading versus listening. Got to do both. I see firms that fail in two directions on this. Firms that end up almost hamstrung by reacting to the feedback. And at the other end, firms that just decide and go. And the middle is messy, but it's where we should be spending our time.
When you listen, sometimes you're listening to what the end problem is rather than actually what's causing it. So you need multiple layers of information to think about what to do and how to address it.
We haven't even talked about AI and what AI does to tasks, to jobs, to demand yet, but that's clearly a big challenge too.
Well, should we talk about that then? Because that is something that I wouldn't mind getting your view on. Because I feel like a lot of organizations, when we talk the word productivity, a lot of businesses just naturally revert to AI. A really good example that was in the press recently was the Duolingo CEO saying, well, what we're going to do instead of having contract workers, we'll just have AI do it all. And this goes back to your point around governments being one size fits all. I think when you're absorbing that information as an end user, this idea of AI being the panacea to help all types of businesses, it's just patently wrong, really, because businesses are essentially, every business is nuanced, they're complex, they're different, people are different, the requirements needed. An organization of 10,000 people, which is all white collar workers, is a very, very different type of beast to a manufacturing business. The idea that you can apply the same AI principles to get efficiency through cutting headcount because AI is going to solve that problem. So I'm going to start with you, Neil. I feel like you've probably got a good finger on the pulse in terms of industry-wide and what you're seeing and what your members are seeing. Just reflect on that kind of comment, I guess, from the Duolingo CEO. And then, Gems, I'll let you just riff off of that, if that's all right.
So I'm going to jump back, not quite to 10th century Scotland this time. I'm going to jump back about 10, 15 years to the arrival of Uber in the UK. And I was quite involved in bringing a lot of these big gig economy firms, platform work firms into membership at the CBI, the big business organisation that I worked for in the early 2010s. And the attitude there to labour markets was, oh, well, we're going to come and change the world. We've designed the new world, and you're going to adapt to the new world. The whole thing about the Uber case, where Uber drivers were proved to be workers, surprised no one who's actually spends time thinking about employment state. It didn't surprise me at the CBI. It didn't surprise my opposite number, the TUC, either. Labour markets, we joke in recruitment that we've got the only product that says no. People do say no. Sometimes when it's not in their interest. There's a piece here about a lot of this stuff, and it's interesting, it is Duolingo, which is basically an app-based business. Yeah. Comes out of a mindset that's led from the technology by tech bros from the West Coast, and they are usually bros. The labour market works slightly differently to that. I'm fundamentally convinced that what will happen is what always happens, which is that jobs and tasks will reshape into new forms of jobs, and then we will fill those new jobs. It will happen quicker this time than previously. There'll be dislocation, and we need to think about skills and all of that. But the idea that the human intelligence isn't going to be needed. Well, we had our conference in early June. We had Tim Bradshaw speak, and he's really good on the difference between information and intelligence. The thing that appears to be underplayed in this whole debate right now is just how much information AI is now creating. I can sit here after we finish this recording and write you an AI agent that will apply me for 500 or 600 jobs by tomorrow morning. When those applications arrive, I'll look like a good candidate, and you won't be able to tell. So there's a whole piece around proof of actual human, as in, is this a human being? Is this human being actually who they say they are and with the skills that they say they are? Trust matters more and more in this world. We just need to be careful that kind of transactionalizing employment feels great if you've got shares in a West Coast technology company. Doesn't feel great if you're almost anyone else. I think the path of AI is fast, but it's more moderated. If you think about it from the point of view of most businesses, you want to be leading edge, not bleeding edge. You're facing into an AI environment where the VC funding environment for AI firms is cutthroat. It's very easy to build a point AI solution that picks up loads of attention and then dies back. Actually, what businesses want is coherent solutions that work across the system that exists in their business. And that system is a human and technological system. Even within the technological system, you need the different bits of technology to talk to each other. I did an event in Leeds yesterday with one of our partners who provides CRM for the industry. They put up a 40-box grid of what you might do in a staffing firm that involves technology. If you've got an Excel spreadsheet in any of those boxes, that's probably not great. But if you've got a freestanding point solution AI agent in each of those boxes, that's also not good. There's something here about organizational design. How do you get your data sorted so you can build automation on it, so you can build AI on it, so you can build agents on it? And it is that order. If your data's not sorted, it's not going to do anything. How do you do that cognizant of the fact that you need one system that you understand and trust the data that's coming out of? So there's a whole slew of organizational design into which you then have to play the kind of the people part of OD with lots of thinking about skills transition. I think the most difficult thing for most firms now is challenging staff that have worked for them for a long time, where you turn around and say, we need a different set of skills now, and we're happy to help you step up into it. But fundamentally, if you don't step up into it, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I really like that. It would be quite amusing you writing that AI job application process and me as the interviewer at the other end running those job applications through an AI bot. And we never actually need to speak. I mean, let's forget about culture within a business. We'll just let the two AIs deal with each other and then start hiring people. I'm being flippant, but Gems, do you want to build on any of those bits? There's some really fascinating stuff in there. I've just written down augment versus automate as well as a very important bit. And as Neil was just talking about there, it's that balance, isn't it?
Absolutely. I picked up on those things as well. I like the idea of the human and the tech system, the thought between information and intelligence linked back into sort of data as the baseline. If you've got good data, then you can build all of the things on top of it. To all the things that we've talked about previously in previous podcasts and ourselves from a LACE perspective. And then just in terms of the skilling, it's about that speed to identify the opportunities where AI can be used within the workplace. And then linked to that, how do we think about it from a skills perspective in knowing and forecasting the skills that are going to be building? How do we reskill? How do we redeploy? And think about using AI and identifying that as well as a people edge. So that balance, the human and tech, how can we get that correct? Is that the same for everyone?
Yeah, I don't think it is the same for every business, but I do think it's the bit that seems to be missing from a lot of this grandstanding stuff you see from some of the tech CEOs, which is how do you strike that balance? Really good people planning needs to understand where you need people now, but where you'll continue to need people. And I think we're slightly locked in it's not unlike the debate about hybrid. I'm at home today for the first time in about 9 days. It's amazing because I've got a lot to catch up on. It's the REC conference next week, so I've got a speech to write after this. But, I can do everything in my job description from home. What I can't do is build trust with staff, understand poke and prod problems without it feeling like it's oversight, a whole slew of things that we all do in our day-to-day work that we know that in-person connection doesn't have to be in an office, but in-person connection really matters to. The work that goes sideways rather than straightforward. I do think that there's almost a sense that we've seen some of this narrative around AI destroying jobs before, and we saw it with Fordism and Taylorism, which is just the efficient application of production processes. But we're dealing with human beings. There will be efficient application of production processes. People will stop doing some things that they do now. The real challenge to companies is how do you train staff to do the things you will need them to do next? And how do you put the customer at the heart of what you're doing? Our three things are run towards it, work from your business, not from your technology. And then the third bit, which I think is particularly important, is look at what you can already do. Lots of firms have SaaS contracts already where there are bits of AI going in. A big bit of my advice to a lot of our members is remember you can get 80% of the way on 60% of the cost just by applying some fairly standardized tools rather than doing anything massively specialist. All of that framed in a training mindset means you'll get access to the productivity, because the real risk is that you adopt the technology but don't get the productivity gain. And traditionally, and it hurts me as a patriot to say this, traditionally in Britain, we've been bad at that. Americans traditionally get more from technology investments than we do because they train better and they bring the people with them better. So I think there's a uniquely British challenge there about management of the change process that feels important.
I think that has anything to do with our mindset and openness to either change or technology.
I think we're pretty open to technology. So we tend to have high levels of adoption. People are keen. I think we are impatient to get to the decision traditionally in the UK. And that is problematic. That might be problematic in terms of complex process redesign, organizational redesign. But, all of this speaks to a certain form of thinking about HR and thinking about people leadership, where we're much more in the line and redesigning production. This probably is the big opportunity to lean towards that and away from some of the more process-based stuff. A lot of that should be being done more and more within the system.
Really interesting that you talk about the speed to decision. When you're talking about productivity, it doesn't happen overnight. You can't see the change. It often takes a really long time, decades sometimes, to see that shift. We often see businesses redesign every few years without giving the opportunity to see the benefits of productivity. What would your position be on that in terms of what we need, the shift in the way that we do work from today to the future, and how much that patience to give the productivity chance to show?
That's really interesting. We're just working on some stuff at the moment around verifiable credentials, trying to do work history in a secure way where people can carry it with them and offer it up freely when they want to, but there's no expectation that they do it. Our thinking about that and the discussions we're having with our members are, this probably saves you a lot of money, but it saves you a lot of money in year 3 and 4. And that is a challenge in an environment where trading is not great for lots of businesses at the moment. Where you started, Chris, and where your white paper starts is efficiency comes from taking heads out. And let's be honest, sometimes putting a bit of pressure in the system that way is the right thing to do. I think there is a way to go in some areas on patient capital behind that. But my core observation would be actually our problem isn't patience, our problem is lack of effective management of the process. So actually you don't have year 1, year 2, year 3, you have 3 versions of year 1. And that's the bit we have to get to and change. This feels like a terrible place to end up, but are we back at the traditional discussion about quality of management and quality of consistency in business? I think we probably are.
Yeah, perhaps this is where the champions of AI would say taking away certain types of admin tasks that enables you to focus on some of the other tasks, the less tangible tasks, the quality of management tasks could come in. I think it's quite interesting that you were talking about that long-term benefits as well. We started right at the top talking about CPOs, CEOs managing risk. This idea that you're going to see the benefits in years 3, 4, and 5. Well, I'm a CEO or I'm a CPO and I've got some shareholders that I need to keep happy. I'm focused on the dividends and the revenue this year. So just to kind of finish us off for today's podcast, final thoughts from you, Neil, on what businesses can do, what CEOs, what CPOs can be doing to be a bit more comfortable with risk, to enable them to drive more productivity, as we talk about in the efficiency paradox. And Gemma's just mentioned it. Sometimes this is a longer term thing. The benefits are realized over a longer period of time. Can I get the final thought from you on stepping out of that comfort zone and being comfortable with dealing with risk?
The challenge in the UK has always been patient capital. And I think there's actually a big job to do to keep driving that, although I think we're in a better position today than we were 10 or 15 years ago. In terms of what businesses can be doing, I think the main issue for chief execs is how much do you commit to your view of the world versus wait for the world to come onto you and then play that the most appropriate way. I think the passive stance worked quite well in the post-Great Financial Crisis world, where you managed month to month, quarter to quarter, you made the numbers, you paid the dividend. I think when the world is moving around you, that becomes more difficult. But we're recording this on the 85th anniversary of the Dunkirk evacuation. And if you look at both what is happening in the German High Command and in Britain this week 85 years ago, the people who are wrong are the people who are being cautious. Those who are cautious in the German attack on Dunkirk fundamentally hold up the capture of the town and stop the Germans taking 300,000 British prisoners into the bag. If they do that, the war's over. On the flip side, people in London who are talking about negotiation don't appreciate that actually the position the Germans are in is much weaker. Yeah, my single most important belief about the Second World War is the Second World War was won on the 28th of May 1940, once it became clear that the British Army would get back to Britain. The point there is, in both those cases, in a time of high flux, it is the uber cautious people who are actually, on one side, stopping their side winning the war, and on the other side, if they'd won, would have stopped their side winning the war. It is those who are engaging with what's changing around them and taking calculated risks who make a difference. Now, business is a different world, but understand that this is normal. Where we are now is normal. And therefore, as a leadership team in a business, educate yourselves on what these trends are, get across them, and then fundamentally spend some time thinking through what that means for the decisions that you make. And then you're going to have to make a few, and it is only a few really big bets. Yeah. And then those big bets flow through to your technology strategy. They flow through to your people strategy. Strategy without tactics is the longest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before the defeat. I think a lot of businesses are at risk of being stuck in the tactics without strategy world.
Neil, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for giving us some of your time today. I loved some of the conversation that we've talked around this idea of risk, the augment versus automate, and tasks reshaping to jobs was fantastic. And the AI chat as well, prompts that we've talked about, the trust element as well, trust within the data, trust within AI agents that you're using. Do I actually trust? And some of the stuff we talked about around predictive modeling as well, really
especially in a world where you're not going to be able to trust video of anyone within the next year.
Exactly. This is exactly it. It's all AI generated.
Not even here.
Me neither. So we've just let our agents do the whole podcast for us. Neil, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you both. I've really enjoyed it.
Where can people find you? Or is there anything that you want to give a final plug in terms of REC, any stuff that you've got going on at the moment you think might be interesting for HR people?
So I am at REC Neil on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Blue Sky. We are really interested in our organisation being the place where talent companies in Britain come to have their trade association and professional body. So we've grown out of being a body for employment businesses, employment agencies, but increasingly our family is broader. People should look out for REC affiliate membership over the summer as an option for firms who want access to the data that we produce that the Bank of England uses for labour market pieces, through to the kind of campaigning, lobbying and insight work that we do.
Lovely. And what we'll do is we'll put a link to the affiliate page, if you've got one, on the REC website, so people can access that as well. Gems, thanks for co-hosting.
Thank you. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure having you two lovely people on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Easy for me to say. You wouldn't think we've done 250 of those. I can't even get the words out. From myself, from Neil, from Gems, we hope you've enjoyed listening to this podcast. I hope to catch you next time on HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.